Josh Brown, it's another day on the internet and people are aggy about something. Today it's Hellblade 2 and I'm one of them, goddammit. I finished the game, I did it in about 2 sittings. And we're going to break down various things around this video game. I guess you can class this as a review?
Yeah.
Maybe the nearest thing I'm going to get to a review.
From you at least. I've only played half of the game, so these are very much more of my first impressions, I suppose. I say I've played half. In relation to Hellblade, that means I've played about 3 hours because it's not a long game. But yeah, for me it's not a full review. For you, it's a full review.
Well, that's the whole thing with this game, is that even when you say I've played about half of it, the fact that it is about 5 to 6 hours long, you can make it a bit longer if you want to mop up all the collectibles and stuff. You have almost seen, you've seen enough of it where you can render a good opinion on the combat, the general presentation, and various themes that it's getting at. I finished it, will not be doing spoilers, but there are a few different things to touch on in regards to the wider discourse of the game, how it sits in Xbox's catalog, is it a win for Xbox, etc. Yes, it is, but we'll get back around to that. Initial thoughts on the game before I then cleave it in two.
I like it. I think you said people are going to get aggy at the start of this video, Scott. I'm scared I'm going to get aggy with you. Because you made some claims last night on Twitter.com, or I guess formerly Twitter.com, and that I don't fully agree with, because I'm, you know, like I said, 3 hours-ish into the game. I don't think it's a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. Maybe going in with those lowered expectations after knowing your opinion and seeing the reviews.
I feel like I do him a public service. Every time I help him out.
Sometimes you do. But even in and of itself, there are a lot of elements that I like and I think are executed better than in the first Hellblade. But there are areas where I expected innovation and polish that aren't there. So overall, like, I definitely recommend playing this game. I think you have to be in a specific mindset for it and know what it is going in and kind of temper your expectations in terms of what you're actually doing in the gameplay. But as you know, Scott, I'm a huge fan of walking simulators.
Same.
So many of my favorite games and favorite stories come from that genre, and this isn't too far away from that. And we'll dig deeper in on the mechanics, but so far, honestly, so good.
Well, that's good. I feel like, yeah, I love walking sims too. I do feel like it's worth saying, because it is literally for about 80% of the entire game, you are just pushing up on the analog stick. And a lot of animations are playing out themselves. One of the early ones in the game is just Senua climbing a cliff, and you're just pushing up to trigger the next one of those handholds, and then go again and go again. A lot of the stuff in the game in regards to how artistically minded a lot of that stuff is, you can argue it's obviously intentional. Like, you know, the whole idea is that Senua just needs to keep pushing forward, literally as a character, in terms of her agency and what she's doing, so that comes across in terms of what you're controlling. The thing that I couldn't shake for the entire game is just how much it felt like a tech demo, and how much it would have been better off as a tech demo. If it came out a good few years ago, obviously it was announced I think in 2019, or maybe 2018, Ninja Theory were acquired in 2017, but it was around then. And we had that incredible teaser trailer, you know, where it showed there was like a cult ritual going on, had Senua in the middle, the facial animation was incredible. If they'd kind of just released it as a freebie for Game Pass, like in the middle of the pandemic, and just sort of said, look, this is what we're aiming for, this is what Unreal 5 tech can do, I think a lot of people would have been blown away. I think by going anywhere near the idea of it being a video game, a £50 game, etc., invites a whole bunch of comparisons to other things on the market, or expectations, and that, to me, it only does it a disservice. Like, it's a worthwhile experience overall, but I just feel like it gets in its own way if you start even remotely holding it up to other video games.
See, I agree and don't agree, especially for that price point. I think, you know, $50, I mean, that price point is entirely subjective. I could argue my case for why I think it's worth that, but I could totally get someone comparing it to other games on the market that might give them more value for the time that they're going to get out of it. And it's like I can't argue against that. That's your opinion. I'm never going to get to change it. It's going to be entirely relative to the value you bring to the table. For me, I think by lowering it from 70 or 60 to 50, to me, sets expectations in a good way. I do think that the opulence on show, even if you don't have much agency over it, like, you can tell there's a lot of money on the screen. It's not like they've sort of skimped out in that regard, I don't think. No. Like, 5 to 6 hours, yeah, it's certainly short, but man, I look at it and I look how authored this is, and I can see why it took so long to bring together. Yeah. But, like, that's the thing, like, when you get into discussions of what a game even is to you, we're all kind of going to have like completely different conclusions on that. However, I will agree with you that I think the context in which this game has released has killed it a little bit. The graphical presentation and the animations and the lighting, especially in this game, feel next gen. They probably feel best in class on the market, but the gameplay is entirely what you expect from a sequel to Hellblade 1 that might have released in 2019 or 2020 or 2021. And I think that's not just a Ninja Theory problem. I think that's a game dev problem as a whole. Like, not to just lump it all on Xbox, but I had similar problems with Horizon Forbidden West, a game I really enjoyed, but would have loved if it didn't take the 5 years or 5 years to maybe even longer to develop, and come out so long after the first one, because it's definitely more of an iteration than a complete revolution, which used to be fine when games came out every 3 or maybe even 4 years, but to wait this long and to not see those advancements in the gameplay, I can definitely understand those criticisms, and I have criticisms on the gameplay itself as well.
That's the thing. I kind of want to ground this a little bit and just talk about literally what you're doing in the game, because it is literally a ton of hold forward on the analog stick, walking segments, the animations that play out, whether you're clambering over something or just navigating cave systems or whatever it is. You have that. You have the combat slices, which are pretty much identical to Hellblade 1 in terms of what you're doing. However, they've taken some moves out. You don't have dodge moves anymore, dodge attack moves anymore. It kind of plays itself, which is interesting because that is an option you can do in the accessibility options. You can literally have the gameplay itself. And part of me would argue that you should, because if you let the AI take over, Senua loses quite a lot of those hits and then manages to just claw through the fights, which obviously thematically lines up a lot more with her character and the struggle overall. So there is that, and then the other chunk of the game are the rune puzzles that were in the original game. They're a lot easier here, but you're trying to line up parts of the environment to match certain shapes that match up with certain runes to progress through. So it's similar. It's nigh on identical in terms of the setup from the original. However, the level design is nowhere near as open-ended as the original. Not that the original was open world or noted for being huge, but you had various pathways through certain levels, whereas here it is very much you are going down a certain corridor over and over and over again, and even if the environment looks absolutely gorgeous, which it does, 9 times out of 10 it's just a straight corridor all the way down, and you might enjoy that. You might just love drinking it all in. Sometimes you'll get a bit of a diamond shape and then back down again, but I do think that, like, to me, that just made me think you've kind of wasted all this potential presentation stuff. Like, it looks gorgeous, but it's just a ton of rocks, and I was like, this is so boring as an overall aesthetic. I wish they did so much more with the aesthetic, and I'm not going to go into spoilers, but there is that, you think about the original teaser trailer, you think about the potential of just how dark and gruesome they were going to be getting with all that stuff, and to me, they don't really pay it off.
Lots I agree on, lots I don't agree with, Scott.
Good.
You've mentioned so much there, so many things that are worth diving into. First off, I think going back to the gameplay that you mentioned, in that split between just pressing up combat and the rune puzzles, I suffered through the rune puzzles in the first game and was very, I suppose, kind to them in hindsight, assuming that they would get better in the sequel, and they are less annoying and less intrusive, but it just makes me question kind of why they're there at all. Then they were one thing that when they turned back up again, I was like, I could have done without this. If you're not going to really innovate on them and make them more interesting and compelling, I think they're a little bit of a waste of time. They have also simplified the combat, but I like the combat. It is incredibly simple. I liked it in the first Hellblade, and it's flashy enough in Hellblade 2 to, get me invested in those gameplay segments. Like, even though I'm not auto-playing it, like, I feel like getting the intended experience of sometimes getting my ass kicked and just scraping through, and sometimes dominating, especially when you use that kind of L2 super move to hit people faster. My only issue with the combat, and it is a big issue admittedly, is the framing of those encounters. And that's because every time you fight someone, or at least up to the point I am at right now, they are all structured very similar in that you might have more enemies to fight per combat encounter, but you're only getting attacked one at a time, which can lead to like the same animations of you kill someone, suddenly someone grabs you, throws you back into the arena, then you fight them, then someone else does the same thing. And I do think it works thematically and really contributes to the idea of Senua getting like pushed and pulled like around this thing and kind of not being in fully control. But from a gameplay perspective, I think it does get old, and I think it's the main part of the game for me, I don't know if you agree, where you can see the stitching of the developers being like, right, we're activating another combat sequence and we're not going through it as fluidly as they do some of the other cutscenes, because at least up until the point I'm at now, all the game is done in one take, which is very impressive. I think it's even more impressive than the one take in God of War. But that you start, again, seeing the scenes when you get to combat and you're like, right, okay, we're starting this again, we're going back in.
Yeah, also, they take out the thing from Hellblade 1 where you're going to be attacked from behind or from the side, and the voices in your head would, in 360 audio, tell you, like, hey, watch out, like, on your, literally behind you. Oh my god, let me turn and deal with that. They take all that stuff out. So it is just a series of one-on-one encounters that are identical from the beginning to the end. That's a real shame, I think, considering the amount of time that it's been in development. And I mean, the thing is, like, that's all the whole thing about expectation. Do people think that the game's combat would have more to it going forward? I think that's a natural assumption of a sequel. I never minded Hellblade 1's combat. I thought it was fine enough in terms of what it was able to do. But their love of the motion capture technology that they have, the amount of animation that's in here, can get in the way of the responsiveness. It was an issue that something like Stellar Blade had a couple months ago. And sometimes you just want to block, you just want to dodge, and the dodge is more responsive than the parry here. But depending on what animation they're trying to sell you in the moment,
right.
Like, oh my god, Senua is struggling, she's about to die, that'll get in the way of whatever the button you're pushing is trying to do.
Right, okay.
And sometimes that can get a bit annoying. And I think they walk a line with, like, there's no HUD whatsoever in the game, and the nearest thing you have to that is just the meter that charges up on your hip before you can do the special attacks. But they walk a line by not having any HUD and then still having interactable elements in fights, in parts of the environment, where you kind of just have to guess, like, well, in other video games, I'd probably be pushing this face button for an attack, so chances are that's what I'm supposed to do. And you can think that's a positive or not. I don't mind it necessarily, but I do think that it makes the whole thing feel just a little, like I said, a little bit tech demo, just a little bit take it or leave it kind of thing. It's a weird feel overall, especially then when you're compounded by the fact that it is only about 5 hours long anyway. Just a strange feeling art project of a video game, which
Absolutely.
I'm glad exists, but still.
I like, 9 times out of 10, what you're talking about there, that sort of integration of cutscene and gameplay without a HUD indicating what you need to do. It worked for me. There were definitely times where I thought I was still in a cutscene and I thought Senua was going to do something and I realized I needed to press X for it to move something out the way to continue crawling or something like that. But to me, like, even if we do call it a tech demo, like, I'm constantly wowed by it. Like, there are so many times where I press a button to parry and thinking I was in a cutscene, and then I'm not in a cutscene, it's actually gameplay, and I'm like, holy hell, you've blended this so well. I literally, in a good way, in a complimentary way, don't know what is a cutscene and don't know what is happening in real time right in front of my eyes that I am in control of it. I thought that was spectacular for me, but it is definitely a strange sort of, it is a strange feeling game overall. For me, and again, I mean this as a compliment, it might end up going on the thumbnail of this video, who knows, but I think it's as much a game for people who don't play games than it is people like me or you. I think that depth of the combat, the depth of the gameplay has been sanded off, and I could definitely see why people are frustrated with that. I'm frustrated with it in certain areas. But I do think this is intended to get people who only have a casual interest in games and might own an Xbox, and their partner might have Game Pass, or their son and child might have Game Pass, and they look at it and think, well, I only really need one hand to play this game. I can push forward if I want to and get an immersive experience. Because to me it is, I've seen this echoed in the reviews, more of an experience than a game. Yeah. And again, that might disappoint some. You definitely need to know what you're buying. But when I was playing it last night, man, and again, my expectations were low, might have helped. Had the headphones on, was engaging with the game. Like, I was like, I'm in. The visuals, the audio, the presentation, for me was just so much of my thing, and we'll get more into that in a second, I suppose, but I was like, right, I'm in. Okay, I don't even need gameplay necessarily.
No, that's what they nail. Like you said, audio presentation, like the general look of it, the idea of just going on this journey, just having this experience of going through this land and having various things happen to Senua and figuring out the world, the mystery of the world, etc. That's just really good. At some point, you are, like I said, you're literally holding up and sprint as long as the sprint button, which just means amble slightly faster. For so much of this game, where to the point where my hand was aching, where I was like, is this meant to be like a comment on, like, it's the pain of Senua getting through, and I just needed to be able to do it, like Metal Gear Solid 4's corridor style or something. I don't think that's the case. I think at some point this just feels like filler. That was my thing by the end of the game, and again, not spoilers, where I thought even though it's like 5 hours long, it still outstayed its welcome. Like, I would have trimmed the rune puzzles. There are other puzzles in here in terms of going to find objects and putting them in places. Just rote stuff that like just feels like you're wasting my time. Really slow ambling along the side of a ledge for 5 minutes type stuff things that felt outdated 10 years ago, that feel like they're in here just to bloat the runtime. If you stripped them out, you wouldn't lose anything on the story side, and then the gameplay side, it would actually trim it all the way back down to a literal tech demo. But again, I argue that would actually be in its favor if it released like that and was marketed as such. I still feel like overall it never escapes that, because of just how little you are doing. The most in-depth thing is the combat, but then that doesn't change. So it's very much a motion capture showcase, which is the bits and pieces, that was reflected in the marketing, that Ninja Theory are the best in the world and when it comes to motion capture and digital integration. But to me, that is all it is. We'll do spoiler chats at some point once Josh has finished it over on the podcast feed, but I didn't think it nailed anything other than its presentation. And even then, I thought the rocks got boring. So,
I think that's going to definitely be representative of how much mileage you get out of this game. Like, if you look at the trailers and you don't like the motion capture techniques, you don't feel involved in Senua's story, and you don't really get along with the aesthetic they're trying to present, I don't think there's going to be much in here that will change your mind from a gameplay perspective. Fortunately for me, I think they actually nail the aesthetic much better than the first game did, and it's not just because this obviously looks prettier. I just think the framing and the more...
It's got black borders, we should say.
It does have black borders as well.
Like a forced smaller ratio.
For me, though, it's more like the horror focus, and I know there was a lot of horror in the original game, but for me, they nail it from the opening cutscene onwards in a way that I wasn't expecting, and using that 3D audio and the voices to accentuate that horror, I thought worked a lot, because the visuals can do so much, but we've seen guys getting cut open and sacrificed so many times now, but when you combine it with the crunchy audio and the screams and the wails that are going on, it just created this really hellish, oppressive atmosphere that, I was all in on. Treating this as a horror game has worked a lot for me. There are already so many sequences that I was laughing at, but in a way of, I can't believe they're doing this. You know what I mean? Oh my God, this is...
Are you still messed up? This
is incredible. This is messed up. Look at that. What the hell is that doing in the game? Having those reactions, and that to me is kind of what I want from
That's its best
this
foot.
Experience. Yeah, and that is definitely its best foot, because I think in terms of the aesthetic, best foot forward. In terms of the aesthetic overall, I said this to you before recording, and it sounds like a little bit of a bit, but I had the same reaction to Hellblade 2 that I had with Red Dead Redemption 2 when you first get to the open area near Valentine, and I thought Red Dead Redemption 2 at the time looked like a classic painting almost, with the rolling hills and the skybox, and I get that same vibe from Hellblade, where I wish it was more interactive, but I look at the environment, and I look at the skybox, and I look at the lighting, and I just think, for me, who is someone who just likes pretty visual stuff, I'm like, wow, and I'm stopping and I'm looking and I'm turning around and I'm like, I wish there was more to interact with, but this is doing it for me.
Yeah, that's my thing, is I love pretty visuals as much as the next person, or maybe even less. I prefer gameplay, to be honest. But at the same time, it is just that thing of cool, this is pretty, what else have you got? Oh, nothing? Okay, cool. And then never being able to shake that. Let's bring it back around to the whole where it sits in the wider discourse and the wider context stuff of, is it a win for Xbox? That's a whole conversation going on right now, considering that it was announced alongside the Series X, the idea that this would be the game that would show off what the system can do, this is why you would buy a Series X, etc. I don't think it's why you should buy a Series X, but obviously if you have Game Pass, it's worth downloading. However, I do think that has become a double-edged sword, where the idea of you're paying for it anyway because it's a monthly subscription, you might as well download it, almost inoculates it to the idea of criticism, because you're probably going to check it out anyway, or you might as well give it a shot anyway, which, again, that's the other side of the sword, is that by setting it up like that, you're encouraged to try a bigger variety of games, which was in itself the promise of Game Pass, which is why I think it's a win for Game Pass. The fact that it exists, the fact that this much money was put into it, the fact that Ninja Theory were given a 7-year dev time to produce this, and that's their dream project, and they nail everything for what they're going for. That is why it's a win for Xbox. Obviously, and a win for the platform, and a win for gaming, etc. You don't get projects like this very often, hardly ever, to be honest, and it's worth celebrating that, even if you come away from it going, well, it's not for me, which it isn't for me, but I like that it exists. I think that that's why, like I said, it should be celebrated and championed overall. However, it's not going to be the system seller. I don't think people are going to be hoovering this up the same way that they bought Xboxes for Starfield, for example. And I think Xbox's marketing has done a huge disservice to the reality of the amount of time and effort put into the game. I think it's very hard to market this game anyway. But that's what I want. If I was in the marketing department, accept the challenge. Like, I feel like overall there's a conversation on can this hang with the Sony first parties, the God of Wars, the Ghost of Tsushimas, and obviously it can't. It's not even remotely the same game.
No.
But I feel like a lot of people still don't know just the way this is going to play, the reality of it. And I feel like the marketing department could have done a lot better job of that to celebrate the best parts of this and get people ready for the tech showcase, the visual side of it, a bit more than they have. So I'm curious about how it goes in the next few weeks, in the next few months, because I feel like Xbox kind of shying away. People didn't even know it was coming out. The last couple of weeks, it was like, I guess that's coming out, whatever. And even when, I'll finally stop rambling, but even when they put their graphic out saying these games are coming to Game Pass, Hellblade is on the second row at the end. Like, it's not even like, we're finally launching Hellblade, this is Ninja Theory, we're glad we bought these guys, first game in 7 years. Like, there's none of that. And they, like I said, to me, that's a huge disservice to the reality of the tech on show.
Yeah, I'm conflicted on this because, to be honest, I don't know, man. Like, I think they didn't. Like, they could have put more marketing behind the game. They could have made a bigger fanfare of it, and running up to its release could have been like you said, first game in 7 years, here we go, one of our first acquisitions, here's what they produced. But at the same time, like, I think what they have shown from the game has been representative of the game that we got. Like,
right.
I know there are a lot of maybe larger expectations that come with Ninja Theory now being acquired by Xbox, but even back in the day, like the studios they initially acquired, like In Exile and Obsidian and Ninja Theory, like Obsidian's probably the biggest of the lot, and even then they, in terms of resources, in terms of output, like I don't think they would have been viewed alongside a Naughty Dog or Guerrilla Games or whatever in terms of what they had access to. I mean, New Vegas is my favorite game of all time. It's not that they can't make great games, it's just that the scale and I think the expectations are smaller, especially with Ninja Theory, who produced what many people were calling like the best AA game of the generation in the first Hellblade. So with
I do think it's just super quick. I do think it's a presentation thing. That's why it invokes those comparisons, because it looks like a AAA, and then that AAA association is the Sony association. I think that's where that conversation comes from. Not one that I would partake in necessarily. They're so different, but I think that's why people go, shiny graphics looks good. That's what Sony are known for. Xbox is doing one of them.
But my question is, why didn't we have this problem then with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice? Because that looked impressive for the time. That looked like one of the best looking games of its era, and I think people accepted that it wasn't going to play like an Uncharted or anything back then. So
I guess they weren't owned by Xbox back then.
I know that. Like I said, I know that brings a certain level of expectation, but I don't know. For me, I can't escape the fact that this is still Ninja Theory. They might have added more personnel, but we know what Hellblade 1 was like. And don't get me wrong, I expected to see innovation in certain areas, but I wasn't expecting Hellblade 2 to suddenly be God of War. And I think from the trailers they've shown off, which looked like Hellblade again, but prettier, I don't know what else they could have done, because I get that it's difficult to market an arty game, but they did it in 2017 with a game called Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, and people loved it, right? So I'm like, I don't know. I don't know where those expectations may have come from and how widespread they were. Just, I can only say for me, like, I never saw that, and I almost think, like, if you have kept up with the marketing, kept up with the trailers, know what Hellblade 1 was like, know that it's only going to cost $50, and have seen the reports and the interviews from the developers saying that it's going to be comparable in length to the first one, I don't know what more they can do to set the table.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I do think the price thing is a huge one. I don't think it's worth $50 or £50. I think it's more like a 20. Like, I don't think $50, £50 is an easy amount of money for someone to just fork over. Like, it's only 20 less than the premium or whatever. Like, to me, that's still a lot of money to throw down for something that is only 5 hours long. And I don't want to get lost in that conversation.
Yeah.
It's more about the reality of the quality that is here for that 5 hours. Yeah. You can have immaculate short games. Inside is one of my favorite games, and that's barely like 4 hours long. I love that thing. But still, like, just the price side of it, I think that's just my thoughts on that. But still, like you said, the marketing that was there contrasted to Hellblade 1. Hellblade 1 had that whole, we're doing a AAA looking game for an indie budget thing. That was what it sort of coasted on, and it became this kind of cult classic that was then recommended word of mouth style. And then once Ninja Theory got acquired, a lot of people looked at Ninja Theory's previous stuff, DMC or Enslaved or whatever, Heavenly Sword, and said, oh, can this be Xbox's Naughty Dog? And that became a whole other conversation, which didn't really last that long, but there was that conversation on, is that why they're buying Ninja Theory? And I don't think that applies to this, but I think it's interesting looking at them as a part of the first party portfolio, and looking at something like this as a potential system seller, and as a, being associated with the Xbox brand. Like, but it's what you said, that's that's the takeaway is what you said. They're Ninja Theory regardless. They've stuck to their guns. They've put the money behind the thing that they wanted to make.
Yeah.
And that should be what Game Pass allows them to do, which it has done, at least for now.
And don't get me wrong, like, I am, some of my biggest frustrations with the game is that there isn't more to do. You mentioned those more wider open areas earlier in this review, and my heart kind of sank when I got to one of those first areas and it was allowing me to go into a bunch of different rooms, but there wasn't much to interact with. It was just, again, like really pretty set dressing, but I thought that there would have been stuff in there that deepened the world or deepened that area that I was in, but it is just, like you said, that sort of diamond shape of you can go left or right, but we're going to eventually get to the exact same thing anyway, and a bit of freedom is always welcome, but yeah, there are elements I definitely would have loved to have seen them double down on, and I hope they expand on that if they ever get to make a Hellblade 3, but I do think overall it's still not, even though it comes in under my expectation in that regard, still not far away from my top ceiling of expectations of what a Hellblade 2 was even going to be based off the first game and based off what we've seen so far. I guess that's the last thing I'll say about that marketing bit.
Yeah, totally fair. I think to round it out in terms of what we were expecting, what we got, like obviously, like I said, I finished it, but I'm not going to do spoilers. I just thought they would do more with the combat, do a little bit more with the template that was set forward in the first one. This does feel like the original game that's prettier, and then they've taken things out, like the bits and pieces that were in the combat, like the voices flagging that someone's about to attack you from behind, or like the dodge attacks or whatever it is, and it does just end up feeling very repetitive, even for a 5-hour runtime. It outstayed its welcome, even though that's an incredibly short amount of time for a video game. Anyway, I just got very sick of just holding up on the analog stick. I was putting the controller down and angling the stick up so I could just sit there and watch her walk through a whole thing. Which you can argue, you drink all the visuals in and whatever. At some point, that's just not going to satisfy as a video game, and I think at some point the medium itself should be reflected in the thing that's being made, at least for me. Yeah. And so I would have liked a bit more gameplay in my video game.
Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not going to sit here as someone who liked Hellblade 2 and say this is the blueprint that all games should adopt. Of course not, but I like that we have this variety. I like that you have games that are more of cinematic experiences than something like, I don't know, Hades 2, very mechanically driven about the runs, also, great story and stuff, but like about the gameplay. That's what kind of sells it in a lot of ways. And I just like that Xbox has gone all in, thrown all of this money at something like this, because it won't be for everyone. But I think that's good. I like that you can watch this review or even just watch the trailers and decide whether you want to take a gamble on it, and you have the opportunity to do it if you want to, invest in Game Pass for a month, so you don't have to pay that $50 price point, which I do agree, yes, is still expensive, absolutely. So it's like, I just like that we have this for a little bit of variation. I like that, it's not trying to be, in my opinion, it's trying to attract the widest possible audience, I think, by smoothing those gameplay edges. But I don't think it's trying to be a homogenous AAA game in the way that a lot of big releases have been recently, where you're like, okay, I've seen this in Assassin's Creed, I've seen this in that game, and we're just getting another version of that. I like that this is, even though it is indebted to other titles, it feels like Hellblade is a thing, and it's pushing forward with its identity, kind of whether you like it or not, and I kind of have to champion that, because it's cool that we get games like that, even if they aren't 10 out of 10s, or if people say, rightly so, like you, well, is it even a game? Because I'm not doing much in it.
It's definitely a game.
Yeah.
But yeah, because that's a whole from Gone Home in 2013 and oh my god, what a video game. It's definitely a video game, artistic medium, love that it exists, but at some point you're doing the same thing for 4 hours solid. I'm just pushing up on the analog stick, and that gets boring and cramps my hand. I do think, to round this out and to hand it over down to the comments, like there is that conversation on what do you want from Game Pass? Do you want a big variety of titles that have indie spirits and more fresh gameplay ideas or fresh conceptual ideas and thematics? Or do you want something that pays your money off and gives you the big bucks in regards to you pay a monthly fee and you get Call of Duty, Diablo, Fallout, Elder Scrolls? Hopefully you can have both, but I feel like until now the idea of Game Pass was a whole bunch of games like this, and the idea of Game Pass as a revenue stream providing that bottom line for various teams to be able to do their dream projects. And then we had the Bethesda closures last week, a couple of weeks ago, of various teams being shut down, Tango Gameworks, Hi-Fi Rush being shuttered and everything, which kind of flew right in the face of that idea of what Game Pass could be. And then because of the acquisitions that have happened, acquiring Call of Duty, etc. This is almost the pivot point. Like this is the diamond in the road of like which way do we go, and how do Microsoft/Xbox go forward. I hope that they manage to satisfy both sides.
Yeah.
But just the reality of the way the internal conversations are going at the minute seems like they're favoring the bigger stuff. So cherish this while you can, to be honest.
That's it, right? Because I think, you know, expectations are different now for games like this because Xbox is different now than they were when they first started acquiring these studios. Since then, they bought Bethesda, they bought Activision Blizzard. And to me, that's always the dream outcome of that has been that it would allow them to do both. It would allow them to have the major blockbusters that appeal to everyone and are huge alongside the more quote-unquote arty games like Hellblade. To me, you don't buy a Ninja Theory or an In Exile or whoever it is if you don't want kind of singular arty experiences, though it does kind of seem like Microsoft, not even just Xbox, are moving away from that going forward. I think it's a cool game, Scott, and as someone who has played so many games this year,
he really has
more games than I have ever played in a year in my life so
not
far.
Tekken 8 though.
Not Tekken 8.
No.
I haven't had time. You know, coming off games that I love but are huge 60-hour, 80-hour, 100-hour experiences like Stellar Blade, Dragon's Dogma, Final Fantasy, Rise of the Ronin, you know, back to back to back. Playing a game like Hellblade, playing a game like Indica alongside it. It's been a great palate cleanser. I think if this is like your one game a year, I can see you getting annoyed, absolutely. 100%. Like if you buy this over, I don't know, the next
That would be a torturous existence.
It would, wouldn't it? But as something that complements those bigger games, as something that is available on Game Pass if you have it, I just love that it's there to kind of punctuate those bigger releases and give you something different and a new flavor that's different from the meal you've had shoved down your throat so many times.
If Game Pass is a gourmet chef providing a variety of dishes for you every month, then you take this alongside everything else that is available to you on that wider table, and hopefully it's satisfying.